Alrighty, guys. This is a day that we've been waiting for such a long time. I've been waiting for this day for such a long time. I've tried to put out those immediate reactions as soon as I finish watching those episodes, and those are really excited. I'm all hyped up. I'm talking super fast because I want to get those videos out and just trying to share my thoughts immediately after watching those episodes. But this is a chance for me to just slow down and talk about my thoughts more in depth on episodes 1 and 2 of a show that I never thought was coming back, Daredevil Born Again. This is going to be a full spoiler discussion for episodes 1 and 2 of Daredevil Born Again. So if you have not seen those 2 episodes, no worries, but just make sure to save this video for later and save this segment for later, wherever you're watching, if you're watching on the podcast or if you're watching the audio only, it doesn't matter. But make sure to come back a little bit later and and join us then, and we'll talk about Daredevil Born Again. But for those of you who have, we will be diving into the first 2 episodes of this new MCU show. So without further ado, let's get into it. Before we do, just a little bit of context for those of you guys who are unaware. So Daredevil Born Again, first of all, Daredevil has been making his little appearances here and there in the MCU for a little while now, since Spider-Man No Way Home. Actually, basically only 2 years after Avengers Endgame, he showed up in Spider-Man No Way Home, which is really exciting. Matt Murdock was back in the MCU. At the time, we just kind of assumed, this is going to be a situation where, same actor portrays the role because they're just so iconic in it. So yeah, it's just going to be the same actor, but it's going to be a completely different Daredevil. That was my assumption, and that was always going to be, I think, the case up until a certain point. So then Daredevil shows up in Spider-Man No Way Home. He then shows up again in She-Hulk Attorney at Law, and he actually shows up as Daredevil, with the yellow helmet, but still Daredevil. And then he shows up again in Echo for a little bit. And at that point, production on Daredevil Born Again had been underway for a little while. Daredevil Born Again was announced with that big Phase 5 announcement, I think, when they first unleashed the Kang Dynasty announcement. And, everyone was super excited. I was super excited. Vincent D'Onofrio was coming back. Kingpin was coming back in a big way in Hawkeye. That was another scenario where we were all like, I guess they just love Vincent D'Onofrio that much that they're just going to use him, use the same actor. Totally fine. That's great. And so we moved on from there. And then we started to get hints that production may not have been going as smoothly as we had all hoped. And not that things were going poorly, but I think the direction that they were going in was perhaps not as ideal. Now, at that time, because Bob Chapek, who had been in charge, and he had really put the mandate out for there to be as much Disney Plus content, as much Marvel content as humanly possible, and I think Daredevil Born Again was kind of a result of that. Not that they wouldn't have made Daredevil Born Again without this mandate, but just the fact that I think, they would have probably taken their time a little bit more, but they had to kind of rush this into production. 18 episodes of Daredevil Born Again, and they just kind of went into it. And so Kevin Feige stopped, and he said, we're going to redo this. And they basically redid the whole show from that point. They had shot something like over 50%, I think, 60%. And they just said, no. I'm sure that there are some shots in these first 2 episodes that are from that original footage that they shot. But I think a lot of it was really new footage. For example, Karen and Foggy, and we'll talk about Karen and rest in peace Foggy, they were not in the original cut of this show. They were not in the original footage that they shot. Vanessa Fisk, she was originally going to be played by a different actress, and instead they brought back the same actress from the first show. And these characters, Karen and Foggy are not appearing in probably more than a couple episodes. Foggy's dead, and Karen is probably not going to show up again for a little while. Their presence in the story is very integral. And so is Vanessa Fisk's, right? So it's kind of hard to imagine, this show, in its current state at the very least, not being some representation of this new storyline that they're going with. So I think that that's interesting. But anyways, we went on from there. And then we also got the announcement that not only was Daredevil Born Again being retooled, but it was being retooled under the guise that it was now going to be part of the Netflix canon. So not only were we getting Daredevil again, not only were we, being reintroduced to Matt Murdock and all the cast and crew that we loved from the first 3 seasons, but also we were going to be connecting these to the original show. And also John Bernthal was going to be coming back as Punisher. Wilson Bethel was coming back as Bullseye. It was all good news from there. So we waited patiently, and now we're ready to talk about the first 2 episodes of what is, I don't know, maybe one of the most anticipated MCU shows ever for me personally. And by the way, in anticipation of the show, I just didn't give myself enough time, but I have actually started rewatching the original Daredevil series, and I've been loving it, by the way. I loved it the first time, and I'm loving it again. I'm only about halfway through season 1. The goal was never to finish it by the time we get to Daredevil Born Again, but my goal is going to be to try to finish it sometime around all 3 seasons. Try to finish that around the time that Daredevil Born Again ends, so that I can just roll right into a rewatch of Daredevil Born Again, because I think that would be really fun, especially given how this show ends. Because, having watched only about 6 or 7 episodes of the first season, the death of Foggy, which we'll talk about in just a second, was still just devastating. It was way more devastating than it would have been if I had just jumped in, having not seen the original show for a long time. And I can't imagine after watching 3 seasons and then jumping into it how much more devastating it's going to be. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So here we go. Let's dive into the actual episode. I took notes, and to be honest, I said this in my immediate reaction. I think there's a lot more to talk about in episode 1. Not that episode 2 is bad by any means. It's not. I think that in the grand scheme of things, when you can just hit next on Netflix or Disney Plus and watch the next episode like I've been doing, just continuing to watch the episodes as I have time, it's like if there are cliffhangers or if there are loose plot threads, you're like, oh yeah, we'll move on. And of course I've seen the show before, so I know what's coming in at least in general, because I don't remember exact specifics. But in this show, we got to wait a week, so in this format. So I think episode 2 is setting up a lot of things. And again, that doesn't mean that I think these 2 episodes are perfect. I think there are a couple things here and there that I'm like, I'm not entirely sure I love that, but we'll all get to that in just a second. So anyways, let's start out here, episode 1. And as I take these notes, these are live thoughts basically as I'm watching the show. And you'll kind of see my progression here as we go along, because the first thing I said in episode 1 as we start out here is, it's so good to see the 3 of them, Karen, Foggy, and Matt, back together again. It has been so long. I mean, again, I had just literally this evening as I'm recording this segment, had watched an episode of Daredevil season 1. So I had just seen them on screen, but you know what I mean. It's just good to see them back again together in the present, but that's obviously not going to last. That's not going to last for long, right? So anyways, we have Matt and Karen, and I'm very curious to remember, or to rewatch season 3, because I don't actually remember what their relationship status was at the end of season 3. I have, as somebody who enjoyed the chemistry between Jennifer Walters, and Matt Murdock, and I guess we'll just dive into She-Hulk theories right now, because again, it doesn't matter. It really has no bearing on how good I think these first 2 episodes are, but it was something that I thought about, right? Because they give a lot of context here in terms of when Matt was Daredevil, when he was out and stuff like that. So if Matt Murdock, right, he sees the death of Foggy, he almost kills Bullseye, right? And then for a year, he stops being Daredevil. So that means that he was Daredevil. He was with Jen before this scene here in Daredevil Born Again. So this is, again, a year passes and he's no longer Daredevil. And so I completely forgot what the relationship status was between Karen and Matt. I know obviously they were together for a little bit, I think, in the Daredevil series, but again, completely forgot what their relationship status was. And so I'm just kind of curious, when did he go to LA? What for? Why did he go to LA? He was just hanging out as Daredevil, wearing the mustard suit and whatnot. But anyways, I think it's interesting. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think about that. When you guys think he went to LA? Was it just right before the show? Probably right before Daredevil Born Again or whatnot? Because it certainly wasn't after, because he wasn't Daredevil. And I had a theory later on as I was watching the episode. I was like, maybe he just went to LA to kind of escape it all. But then I was like, no, because he said he wasn't Daredevil, and that wouldn't make much sense. But anyways, that is all an aside. It doesn't have any bearing on the show itself. So then, we get to this bar scene here at Josie's, and I like how they're setting up the legal focus, right? Foggy and Karen, Nelson, Murdock, and Paige. I really like it. I love, how the camera pans in and out as Matt starts to hear things, right? Things are going on. Foggy's on the phone. And then we get reintroduced to Bullseye, Benjamin Poindexter. Again, it's been a while, so I don't exactly remember where we left him off at the end of season 3. But he is. I remember season 3, because Bullseye, let's be honest, right? Some of these comic book characters, can be quite silly, depending on how you portray them, right? Not that Colin Farrell's portrayal in the Ben Affleck movie was silly per se, but it was a little more, out there. But the version of Bullseye in Daredevil, I remember very, very vividly, was scary. Like, whenever Bullseye went up against Matt Murdock in season 3, you were on the edge of your seat, because he was so formidable and so ruthless. And that version of Bullseye is right back here. And so Matt suits up, he's back. You just can't help but sort of internally cheering, or for me, letting out some actual cheers. And he's great. The music is back. And then Foggy gets shot. And it's just like, you kind of see it coming, and you're watching it and you're going, is he going to come back? Is he going to kind of be in a coma the whole series or whatnot? And then you kind of realize, no, they're just starting out the show and they're killing Foggy and he's gone. And obviously on the one hand, right, you hate it because you want Eldon Henson to stay around. And it's abrupt. I wonder if people who haven't seen the original series, what they're going to think about this. Like, I guess just his friend died. It's a good setup in that way. If you haven't even seen the first 3 seasons, you can at least understand, his friend, really close friend, died, and it set him on this path. That makes sense. But for those of us who have seen the first 3 seasons, it's really sad. It's really devastating. And Karen's reaction, Deborah Ann Wall, who plays Karen Page, I mean, just her reaction to that is so visceral and so real, and it's shocking. It's really shocking. And all the while, you're hearing Foggy's failing heartbeat as the action is just so intense. I love the action in this first chunk. It's not, I don't think, just trying to copy, be a carbon copy of season 1 or the original seasons of Daredevil, but it's that same DNA of just one shots and long takes and really, keeping the steady camera and focusing in on the action and letting the actors do their movements and the martial arts. It's great. And Bullseye, I mean, he's just ruthless. He is ruthless. The flashing lights as well. It's so incredibly intense. It's also interesting, I guess. So the entire point of that sequence was Bullseye just trying to get revenge on Matt, because as he was climbing up to the roof, I was like, what's the point? Like, where's he going? But I guess just the whole point was him trying to get revenge on Matt, because that's really what it seemed like. In his trial later on, they're like, do you want to talk? And he's like, nope, I'm good. So yeah. And Daredevil pushes Bullseye off the cliff. I thought off the roof. I thought he actually died, and the intent was the same. Daredevil didn't really care. Daredevil crossed that line. He was going to kill Bullseye, and he didn't really care. But Bullseye is alive, and in the first 5 minutes, I'm really glad that I took the time to rewatch some of season 1 before this, because you feel that so much more when Foggy dies, and it's really sad. So we head into the intro, and I do miss the old intro, but as we're watching this new intro, we're getting into the new music, which then transitions into the old theme. I was like, I really dig it, because the imagery is everything in New York crumbling, and then this version of Daredevil rising up from all of it. And I think that symbolizes Daredevil born again. And I think that's going to be a big theme as we head into this season. We get reintroduced to Wilson Fisk. Vanessa is running the criminal underworld, criminal empire. And I think it's interesting because they are referencing Echo. They never mention her by name. They never mention Spider-Man by name, even though he's referenced in episode 2, Punisher as well. But they do reference the events of at least the end of Hawkeye and Echo as he's recovering, and he got shot in the face, and so I guess Wilson Fisk went away for a while, and Vanessa's not too happy about that. And then we get some kind of B-roll camera footage. It's this BB show, right? So this is the niece of Ben Urich, one of the reporters in the original Daredevil series. And it's interesting because Daredevil has always had Batman parallels, in my opinion, in terms of the way that they portray him from the Netflix series, mostly from the Netflix series compared to the Nolan trilogy of Batman movies. And I think it's interesting because it's a very similar arc to The Dark Knight Rises, where everyone's like, where's Batman? Where's he gone? Or even in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 at the very end, where they're like, where's Spider-Man? He's gone, and our hero's gone. And he's gone. He's like, I don't want to do this anymore. I've crossed a line. And I think that makes a lot of sense, but it's an interesting place to have Matt Murdock be in this new show. He's also, though, in his revenge arc, right? He's very bitter, and the scene where Deborah Ann Wall shows up again, it's a really good scene where she shows up at the trial and they're talking on the bench, and she's like, I'm in San Francisco, I just came here for Foggy, and they're just two people who are grieving. And you can tell, I mean, it's a testament to how good the actors are, Charlie Cox and Deborah Ann Wall, because you can tell these are two people who really care about each other, but are just so embittered and in such grief even a year later that it's forcing them to stay apart. And I think that's beautiful acting on their part. And so Matt says, I'm going to let the system run its course. I'm not going to be Daredevil anymore. But then surprise, surprise, Wilson Fisk is running within the system. And I think that is the conflict. That's the game that we're playing here. And I think that is really interesting. So then we get introduced to Wilson Fisk's political machinations, and we get introduced to Michael Gandolfini. You let me know how to pronounce that in the comments. I'm terrible with pronouncing names. Who's playing a guy named Daniel Blake. And I'm not going to lie. I'm not super enthused with this character so far through the first 2 episodes, because he's just sort of being a Gen Z hype man kind of guy, like, oh, I'm just this guy. Everything's cool, man. Everything's cool. And I was alluding to it in my immediate reaction. There are some parts of this, Daredevil Born Again that, like I said, in general, the show has the DNA of the first 3 seasons, but it feels newer, right? It feels like it's been updated. It feels like it's been more, not modernized per se, but it feels more in line with the first, with 2025, if that makes sense. I think Michael Gandolfini, I think it's Gandolfini's character is, I'm just gonna call him Daniel Blake. Daniel Blake feels more in line with that. He just kind of feels like, oh yeah, 2025, let's just be cool and TikToks and whatnot. And I'm like, okay, he's talking about memes now, and it just doesn't jive with me so far. We'll see where his character goes. I'm sure he's gonna have a much bigger role to play, but I think that's interesting. And then we get introduced to. Well, actually, I should go back there. Well, because I was going to talk about Matt and Heather. I believe Heather is the therapist's name, and there's an interesting twist that goes on at the end of the second episode with her. But I do like how the show is very political. I've said this before. I really like politics, lowercase p politics, not really capital P politics. Just the political nature of things, like Captain America: Brave New World. I said the best parts of that show, or that movie to me, were really the political things, like the international intrigue, the treaties, the fight over resources. I think that all was really interesting. And I like how this show is diving into, okay, this guy who is, a criminal overlord, or kingpin, I guess, kingpin, right, is now running for mayor. I will say, and this is not the channel, it's not really the place where we go into politics like that. I will say, though, this is probably the closest I'm going to get to it, because this show has some very close parallels to real life. Just in terms of the fact that there is a political figure who is so polarizing, who is dividing the constituents right down the middle, and there are people who love this person, who hate this person, and this person has a history of doing things that some people view as criminal. Again, we're not going to get into it. We're not really trying not to get into too much of it. All I'm trying to say is I find it very interesting that this show, which was made before our own real world election, by the way, it was made well before that, written well before that, but it still parallels a lot of the really interesting things with the rise of Wilson Fisk to mayor. And so I think that that's something that I personally like, but I can see, being a little bit off-putting to other people. I just like, how things can reflect the real world and really speak to a lot of the deeper truths that are going on. So anyways, all that being said, Wilson Fisk is running for mayor, and I think that's going to be a very interesting plot thread going forward. Also using the assassination attempt to, from Maya to call himself a martyr. Again, real world parallels. But anyways, we get a scene now with Matt and Wilson talking to one another at the cafe, and I think it's the scene that was in all the trailers, but it's tense. I love it. I love the conversation between the two of them. He said he was trying to mentor Maya. Yeah, it's an Echo reference there, and it's a great conversation. It's amazing to see also that these two men almost respect one another, but then it's such a fragile truce, because they're like, you step out of line, I'm gonna crush you. That's Kingpin's line, basically. He's like, I'm gonna crush all the superheroes, and he's elected mayor. And Matt's like, if you step out of line, I'm coming right back. And we see at the end of episode 2, he's coming back. He's starting to come back here. And so, on the one hand, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of the election, the actual process of him being elected mayor. But on the other hand, I think it's great that we just get to see him be mayor, and let's get to that point of tension where Fisk is the mayor and he's just trying to crush the vigilantes. He's just trying to crush Daredevil, right? I think that's really, really interesting here. I don't love the choice to end episode 1 with a pop song. It happens at the end of episode 2 as well, in the credits. I don't know. The juxtaposition of Wilson Fisk looking down and Matt Murdock looking up, and I don't know if they're actually looking at each other, but I think that's a beautiful shot composition, and just ending it on pop song, that's another one of those things where it's like, it feels like, oh, that's very 2025, and I don't know if I love that. I really don't know if I love that. I actually probably don't. I think that's one of the weaker parts of this show. But anyways, it's a very minor gripe here, because I think that the ending shots, right, of Wilson and Matt being in juxtaposition would have been so much more impactful if it had been under orchestral music, but I digress. So episode 2, again, I don't have as much to say, because I think episode 2 is a little bit slower, not in a bad way. I just think that it's taking its time, it's getting there, and we're setting up some plot lines. So we get a Spider-Man reference from Wilson Fisk and Punisher reference as well. The political divide is heating up as well. And then we get a little bit more of this subplot with this the niece of Ben Urich, BB. Is her name BB? I could have sworn. Anyways, the niece of Ben Urich, who is doing all these handheld camera shots and whatnot. She gets to meet Kingpin later. We'll have to see about that. It's right now to be determined, because I just don't know what to make of this subplot and how much air and how much time they're going to give it. So we'll see. Kingpin, though, is really not enjoying the bureaucracy of being mayor. He's like, when do I get to do things? And he's having to go to meetings and whatnot. And we see him kind of fighting back against that a little bit later. And so then we get to some more legal stuff with Daredevil. You know, he has his own practice, right? Like I said, he met Heather. He was set up by Kirsten, his partner, his not, you know, romantic partner, but his actual legal partner now, McDuffie, right? Kirsten McDuffie. And you know, it's not Nelson, Murdoch, and Paige, but I do enjoy Kirsten. I do enjoy Cherry and Matt. I think that they're good. They're not gonna be Foggy and Karen. They're just not. But it's still, you know, it's still fun. And I think that it'll do for now is what I will say. And I like where we're heading in that direction as well. So there is that. So then we get to the scene where the niece goes to meet Kingpin, and she's kind of cornering him, and Kingpin's like, oh, we can use her. I don't know where we're going with that story, also with Daniel Blake. It feels a little weird, and it feels a little out of left field. Maybe that was one of the vestiges of the old show. I don't know. I really don't know. Just speculation there. But yeah, we'll see. Then Kingpin shows up and he's like, okay, we got to get the commissioner in our pocket. And he basically does. He threatens him, and he's, you know, the commissioner's like, I know who you are, Kingpin. And Kingpin's like, okay, I'm going to threaten you and you're going to stay on the force. And it's a very, very tenuous, fragile relationship there as well. Also, throughout this entire episode, Matt Murdock is representing a guy who turns out to be the White Tiger. He was trying to save a guy from being beat up. And then it turns out that the guys who were beating him up were police officers, which is really frightening, really scary. And one of the police officers gets hit by the train. And so this guy, turns out he is the White Tiger. And apparently he has a mystical amulet. So we'll see if that has any connections to... I don't know the comic book lore that much. So I don't know what it's connected to in the comics. But in the MCU, who knows? Magical amulet. I immediately thought about Moon Knight. But again, maybe it has nothing to do with Moon Knight. Probably has nothing to do with Moon Knight. But anyways... yeah, I think that that'll be something interesting to follow. I think the actor... Am I wrong to say that the actor passed away? I think that's what the episode opened with, right? In loving memory of the actor's name. I think it was the White Tiger actor, and if so, rest in peace. That's really tragic. Really, really tragic there. But yeah, we have a lot of different subplots going on here. I think that the ending with the Fisks in couples therapy is super interesting with Matt's new love interest. I wonder what that's going to turn into as well. There's a lot of tension up in the air in episode 2, and I'm just very curious to see how things are going to develop here with the cops being corrupt, and with this reporter girl, and with the Fisks having marital problems maybe, and with Matt representing the White Tiger, and also Muse has to show up eventually. We get hints of Muse throughout the 2 episodes, but then in the end, you know, Matt tracks down that witness, that the guy who White Tiger saved, and we get an awesome action sequence in the apartment where the police officers come and they're like, hey, get out of the way, and they start beating up Matt, and I was just cheering, get up, Matt, come on, get up, you know. Yeah, get that Daredevil spirit back, because he does. It's a much more vengeful version of Daredevil, I think, even more so than in like season 3 of Daredevil. And so I think that scream at the end, that's the one that we've heard in all the trailers, but really visceral, which is once again undercut by this pop music that shows up in the credits. And I just don't know for the life of me why they keep doing that. It's really weird. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who doesn't like it, but I really don't like when pop music just undercuts dramatic moments like that. But anyways, guys, that is it. Daredevil Born Again, episodes 1 and 2. Like I said, really enjoyed episode 1. It started off with a bang, and I'm really sad Foggy's gone, but it's so exciting to see that this show is just, you know, back up to speed, and it's really going for it. Episode 2, like I said, setting up some interesting things, and we'll see where they go. We'll see if these things pay off well, or if they're just kind of going to fall flat later on. I think some of these storylines are a little bit more interesting than others, like the White Tiger one is very interesting to me. The reporter one with the niece, maybe not as interesting. Again, not super on board with Michael Gandolfini, his character as of yet, but we'll see where that goes from there. Guys, what did you think of episodes 1 and 2 of Daredevil Born Again? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Were you somewhere in the middle? Let me know in the comments, because I'd be super curious to hear, did the premiere live up to your expectations? Because I think for me, I mean, I don't know how it could have, you know, because I just had such high expectations, but it got about as close as it could have. And I think that for that, I am really, really excited for the rest of the season. Let me know in the comments down below.